Chapter 1. A Tense Departure. The sun was setting over the tarmac as passengers boarded the sleek, polished aircraft. The Orion. This was no ordinary flight. It was a private, chartered jet, departing from Paris for the remote island of Croydon, an exclusive getaway that only the wealthiest could access. Among the passengers was Charlotte Albright, a young, poised woman who boarded with a hint of nervousness that she couldn't quite shake off. She had taken a leap of faith, booking this extravagant escape with a group of strangers, none of whom she had met before. Charlotte had always been an introvert, more comfortable with books and art than in the spotlight of social gatherings. But this time, something feels different. She was running away from something she couldn't articulate, and perhaps this journey would give her the escape she needed. She was one of the last to board, and her seat in the middle of the cabin left her facing an eclectic group of fellow travelers. Beatrice van der Weyden, a socialite known for her wealth and charm, sat directly opposite her. Julian Sinclair, a quiet man with an air of mystery, occupied a seat nearby, his gaze fixed on the far window. There were other passengers, a couple in their late 50s, a man wearing a suit as if he was about to attend a meeting, and a woman with dark, sharp eyes who was constantly on her phone, texting rapidly. As the plane took off, Charlotte caught the scent of freshly brewed coffee and a faint perfume lingering in the air. The sound of the engines, the soft chatter of the passengers, and the hum of the cabin seemed to lull her into a sense of calm. But something was missed. Chapter 2. A Death in the Air. The first signs of trouble came when Arthur Holloway, the man in his 60s, stood up and made his way to the restroom. Minutes passed, and the plane's stewardess noticed the restroom light was still on. He knocked, receiving no answer. When he opened the door, the scene inside was chilling. Arthur Holloway lay sprawled on the floor, lifeless, a thin line of blood trickling from his ear. His face was pale, and his eyes stared blankly at the ceiling. There was no sign of struggle, but the way his body had fallen indicated something had gone terribly wrong. The stewardess quickly closed the door and called for help, but it was too late. The other passengers were informed, and the tension in the cabin grew thick as they were asked to remain seated. The pilot made an unscheduled descent, aiming for the nearest airport in Croydon. As Charlotte processes the news, her heart races. She had been in the presence of a murderer. Chapter 3. The investigation begins. Once the plane landed, the authorities were quick to take charge. Inspector Jonathan Pierce, a no-nonsense officer known for his sharp intuition, was already on the scene. He asked the passengers to disembark in an orderly fashion, leading them into a sterile conference room at the airport. There, they were all seated. The gravity of the situation set in. Arthur Holloway did not die from natural causes, Inspector Pierce said, his voice steady. He was poisoned. The killer is one of you. Charlotte felt the room grew heavier. The eyes of the other passengers now focused on one another. There was nowhere to run, no safe place to hide. Beatrice, the socialite, tried to maintain her composure, but the tight grip on her purse and the nervous tapping of her foot betrayed her anxiety. Julian, who had been eerily quiet throughout the flight, now seems more distant than ever, as though trying to shut himself off from the others. The inspector began his questioning, starting with Charlotte. Chapter 4. Secrets Unveiled. Charlotte, shaken but determined, recounted her experience. She had spoken briefly with Arthur during the flight, but she had nothing substantial to offer. The other passengers had been equally evasive. Beatrice denied knowing anything about Arthur, although she had been seen talking to him earlier. Julian had been sitting quietly for most of the flight. His mood was unreadable. The other passengers were either too preoccupied with their own concerns or too nervous to contribute anything useful. But Charlotte had seen something she hadn't mentioned before, a small vial that had fallen from Arthur's pocket when he had stood up to use the restroom. She hadn't told anyone about it because, at the time, she didn't think it was important. Now, with the investigation unfolding, she realized it was a clue the poison had been carried in that vial. The inspector looked at her with interest. "You saw this vial fall, Miss Albright?" he asked. Charlotte nodded. "Yes, I did, but I didn't think much of it. It was small, and it rolled under the seat. By the time I realized it could be important, the incident had already happened." Give me my mashhanded. Chapter 5. The Web of Deceit. As the investigation continued, Charlotte began to piece together fragments of conversations and moments from the flight. Beatrice had seemed a little too interested in the location of Arthur's seat after the body was found. Julian, on the other hand, had been oddly calm, almost detached, but his past was a mystery to Charlotte. Who were these people? And why had Arthur been targeted? The inspector and Charlotte began to focus on one of the quieter passengers, Marcel Dupont, an archaeologist whose calm demeanor seemed suspicious given the circumstances. Dupont had never left his seat and had barely interacted with anyone during the flight. But Charlotte noticed he exchanged a brief look with Beatrice during the questioning. Could Dupont be involved? Was he hiding something? Or was it Beatrice, whose charm and wealth made her seem above suspicion? Chapter 6. The Shocking Revelation. As Charlotte dug deeper into the lives of the passengers, she began to unravel a complex web of deceit. Arthur had been more than just a random victim. He was connected to several of the passengers. Arthur had been a renowned art collector, and Beatrice had been in contact with him about purchasing a rare artifact that had gone missing months ago. The piece was said to have been cursed, a relic from an ancient civilization believed to bring misfortune to its owner. The mystery took a darker turn when Charlotte discovered that the vial found on Arthur's body contained not just any poison, but a traces of ancient venom from the artifact venom that had been known to cause rapid paralysis. Just like what was seen in Arthur's body, the killer had planned this murder carefully, knowing that the venom would go undiscovered until it was too late. The motive wasn't just a personal one. It was tied to greed, betrayal, and the curse of the artifact. Chapter 7. The Final Confrontation. Charlotte gathered the passengers once more. She had figured it out. The killer was Julian Sinclair, a disgraced archaeologist who had worked with Arthur in the past. Julian had been desperate to get his hands on the artifact, and Arthur had refused to sell it to him. When Julian realized Arthur had kept it hidden, he saw only one way to get rid of him. The final confrontation took place in the airport terminal, where Julian attempted to flee, but he was caught before he could board another plane. His fate was sealed as Charlotte, along with Inspector Pierce, exposing his treacherous plot. Chapter 8. The Unraveling. As the authorities took Julian into custody, Charlotte realized that the journey had not only led to the discovery of a murderer, but had also forced her to confront the shadows within herself. She had been running from something deeper, but now, with the case solved, she had a sense of closure. The artifact, wrapped in mystery, was handed over to a museum for safekeeping, and Charlotte's journey home was bittersweet. She had found more than answers on the flight. She had uncovered truths about her own strength. Chapter 9. The Artifact's Curse. Section 1. The Aftermath. Charlotte stood at the edge of the airport terminal, her gaze distant as the police escorted Julian Sinclair into a holding room. The weight of the case had taken its toll on her, but there was a lingering feeling of something unresolved, something deeper she hadn't yet figured out. Julian's confession had been clear. The artifact was the motive. The murder was not only about greed, but also about restoring a broken legacy. He had spent years tracking down Arthur Holloway, knowing that the man was hiding the last piece of the puzzle, the cursed artifact that had been passed through generations. A treasure said to bring misfortune, but also unimaginable power to whoever controlled it. The artifact's history was steeped in mystery, but Charlotte was beginning to see the cracks. There was more to it than Julian's obsession. She could feel the unsettling presence of the object even after it had been removed from the plane, taken away by the museum. Was it truly safe? Could the curse be lifted? Or had Julian's death merely set the stage for something even darker to unfold? As she walked away from the terminal, the sound of footsteps behind her caught her attention. Turning, she was greeted by Beatrice van der Weyden, the wealthy socialite who had seemed so poised during the investigation. Her eyes were heavy with emotion, and she moved to stand beside Charlotte. "I never expected it to end like this," Beatrice said quietly. "I knew Julian had a motive, but I didn't know how far he was willing to go." Charlotte studied her closely. Beatrice's charm had always masked the secrets she carried, but now Charlotte wondered just how much Beatrice had known about the artifact and its connection to Julian. Had Beatrice been complicit, or was she a pawn in a much larger game? "You were closer to Arthur than anyone else on the plane. Did you know about his involvement with the artifact?" Charlotte asked, her tone cautious but direct. Beatrice hesitated before answering, her gaze flickering to the distance. "Arthur and I had dealings, yes, but I didn't know the full extent of his connection to Julian. I thought the artifact was just a piece of history, but after seeing everything unfold, I realized I was wrong. There's power in it, and power changes people." Charlotte could sense the uneasiness in Beatrice's voice. "Power? What do you mean by that?" Beatrice changed around, as if ensuring no one else was listening. "Arthur didn't just collect artifacts. He knew secrets about the artifact's history, about its influence over those who sought it. The artifact wasn't meant to be sold. It was meant to be locked away. But Julian wanted to use it, and I fear he's not the only one." Section 2. The Hidden Truth. Later that evening, Charlotte found herself in her apartment, reflecting on the conversation with Beatrice. Power. The word echoed in her mind. What had Julian been seeking? And what had Beatrice meant when she spoke of others who might want the artifact? The artifact had been stolen once it had been part of a much older plan that had spanned decades, perhaps even centuries. But now, It seems as though the true scope of its influence had only just begun to be felt. Charlotte realized she needed to dig deeper, to uncover the artifact's full history and understand what it really meant. She contacted a historian friend, Elliot Carrington, a professor who had specialized in ancient cultures and artifacts. Elliot had always been a reliable source of information, and Charlotte hoped he could help her connect the dots. When they met, Elliot's eyes broadened at the mention of the artifact. That piece, it's more than just a historical curiosity. It's a part of a much larger puzzle, a key to understanding the origins of many lost civilizations. And there are other secret societies who would stop at nothing to get their hands on it. How do you know about these organizations? Charlotte asked, leaning forward. And what's their interest in the artifact? Elliot hesitated, as if debating whether to share what he knew. Finally, he sobbed and spoke. I've heard rumors of a hidden society known as the Order of the Eternal Eye. They believe the artifact has the power to unlock a greater dimension of knowledge ancient. Forbidden knowledge that could change the course of history. And they've been looking for it for years. Charlotte's heart raced. So Julian wasn't the only one obsessed with it? No, Elliot said gravely. He was just one of the few who came close. The Order has always been more patient, more secretive. They wait for the right moment. They don't act on impulse like Julian did. But now that the artifact has resurfaced, they will not rest until it's in their hands. Section 3. The Order of the Eternal Eye. The next few days were a blur of research, phone calls, and late-night meetings. Elliot provided Charlotte with a list of leads. But it seemed as though every step forward revealed only more layers of mystery. The Order of the Eternal Eye was real, and its influence stretched far beyond anything Charlotte had imagined. They were powerful, hidden in plain sight, and they had a history of manipulating events to serve their needs. Isla spent hours reading through ancient manuscripts and texts, piecing together fragments of information about the Order. She found references to them in old records, mentions of rituals and ceremonies tied to the very artifact that had caused so much chaos. The more she learned, the more she realized that the artifact wasn't just a piece of history. It was a key to unlocking something far darker. Then came the message, an encrypted note from an anonymous source that had been left on her desk. The artifact is only the beginning. You must find the eye before they do. It's the last step in their plan. The message came with a set of coordinates, an island in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. Charlotte knew she couldn't waste any more time. She gathered the necessary information, ready to confront whatever forces were guarding the eye, the last piece of the puzzle. This was the final leg of her journey, the last chance to stop the Order from gaining control over the ancient knowledge that had the power to reshape the world. Section 4. The Island of the Eye. Charlotte and Elliot made their way to the island, a remote and mysterious place that had remained hidden from the world for centuries. The island was surrounded by dense fog, and the air felt thick with ancient energy. It was clear that the Order had kept their secrets well guarded. As they approached the central temple on the island, a sense of dread settled over Charlotte. The place felt alive, as if it were watching them. The stone walls seemed to pulse with an unseen force, and the whispers of forgotten voices echoed through the inside the temple. Charlotte finds the final piece of the puzzle, a massive stone altar, upon which lay an ancient tome. The eye was here, in the form of an eye-shaped artifact embedded within the book's cover. It pulsed with energy, and Charlotte could feel its power pulling her in. Before she could approach it, she heard a voice behind her. "You are too late, Charlotte." It was Beatrice. Charlotte turned around, startled. "Beatrice? You're part of the order." Beatrice smiled coldly, her eyes gleaming with a dangerous intensity. "I always knew you'd come here. I've been watching you. Charlotte, the order knew you would be the one to uncover the truth. And now, the eye is ours." Charlotte stepped forward, her hand reaching for the artifact. "No, I won't let you control it." With a swift motion, Beatrice drew a dagger from her side, the blade shimmering with an otherworldly glow. "You don't understand, Charlotte. The eye is not meant to be controlled. It is meant to be used. And when we do, the world will change." The room seemed to close in around them, the power of the artifact pulsing in the air. The battle for the future of the world is about to begin, and only one of them will leave the island alive. Chapter 21, The Eye of the Storm, Section 1. The Final Confrontation. The ancient temple felt alive, its stone walls vibrating with an energy that seemed to come from deep within the earth. The air was thick with tension, and every step Charlotte took toward the altar seemed to pull her deeper into the web of mystery that surrounded the eye. The power of the artifact pulsed in her veins, a magnetic force that she couldn't ignore. Beatrice stood in front of her, the gleam of the dagger in her hand catching the flickering light from the stone torches around them. Her face was calm, almost serene, but there was something dark in her eyes, a fanaticism that Charlotte hadn't expected. "You still don't understand, do you?" Charlotte Beatrice said. Her voice is cold. "You're just like everyone else. You think this is about control, about power, but it's not. The eye is not meant to be owned. It is meant to reshape everything. Reality, time, the very fabric of existence. The order of the eternal eye has waited centuries for this moment. And you're standing in the way." Charlotte's pulse quickened as she stepped closer, keeping her eyes locked on Beatrice. "I don't care about your order. Beatrice, I'm not letting you use this artifact. It's too dangerous." The smile on Beatrice's lips faded, replaced by something more sinister. "You don't understand, Charlotte. You never will. The eye isn't meant for people like you. You're too weak, too afraid of what it could do. But I've always understood. I've always known." Charlotte's heart raced. "You don't have to do this. You can't control the world. You can't control time." "Oh, but I can," Beatrice said, her voice low and almost seductive. "I will." Without warning, Beatrice lunged forward, the dagger flashing through the air. Charlotte barely managed to duck, the blade grazing her arm as she stepped back, her heart pounding in her chest. "You don't know what you're dealing with," Charlotte shouted, scrambling to get to her feet. "I won't let you do this." For a moment, their eyes locked, and Charlotte saw something in Beatrice's gaze, something that looked like desperation, fear. It was gone as quickly as it had appeared, replaced by cold determination. "You can't stop me, Charlotte. No one can." Beatrice raised the dagger again, her eyes fixed on the eye, which now glowed brightly, casting a blue light across the room. Charlotte's heart skipped a beat. She knew she had to act quickly. Section 2. The Eye's Power. With a surge of adrenaline, Charlotte lunged forward, knocking the dagger from Beatrice's hand. They struggled, each trying to overpower the other. But Charlotte's resolve was stronger. She could feel the weight of the eye, the power it contained, and she knew that if Beatrice touched it again, it would be over. Time itself will bend to her will. With a swift motion, Charlotte threw Beatrice to the ground, grabbing the glowing eye and holding it in her hands. The room seemed to tremble as the artifact pulsed with energy, the power of the veil swirling around them. Suddenly, the air grew colder. The walls of the temple began to shift. The shadows stretched longer, distorting as though the very fabric of reality was bending. Charlotte could hear whispers, faint, distant voices filling her mind. The power of the eye was overwhelming, like nothing she had ever experienced before. She closed her eyes, trying to block out the voices, trying to concentrate. She can feel the history of the world coursing through her, every moment of time, every decision, every memory. It was all there, right at her fingertips. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. They were calling to her. Charlotte could feel herself being pulled into the eye's power, a dark temptation to see the world as it truly was, or perhaps as it could be. She shook her head, pushing against the overwhelming force. She had to stop it. She had to destroy it before the world was consumed by it. With all her strength, Charlotte raised the eye above her head, ready to shatter it, to end the cycle once and for all. But before she could strike, Beatrice screamed. No. Beatrice's voice cut through the chaos, but it was too late. Charlotte brought the eye down with all her might, and in that instant, a blinding flash of light filled the temple. Section 3. The Fracture of Reality. Charlotte was thrown back by the explosion of light. She landed hard against the stone floor, her vision spinning. When the light finally faded, she forced herself to sit up, her heart racing. For a moment, everything was silent. The temple had stopped shaking, and the energy that had filled the room was gone. The eye was no longer in her hands. It had shattered, its power broken. But something was different. Charlotte stood slowly, her legs unsteady, and turned toward Beatrice. The socialite was on the floor, her face pale. She expressed a mix of disbelief and horror. "What happened?" Beatrice whispered, her voice trembling. "What did you do?" Charlotte looked around the room, her breath caught in her throat. The walls of the temple were no longer shifting. The shadows were still. But there was something off about the air. It was as if time itself had fractured, like a crack had appeared in the very foundation of the world. She realized what had happened. The eye hadn't just been destroyed. It had reset everything. The timeline, the veil, the past, present, and future, they were all beginning to blur. Charlotte turned to Beatrice. "We didn't stop it. We just delayed it." Section 4. A World Reborn. As the realization hit, the air around them seemed to ripple. The distant whispers that had filled the room before began again. But this time, They weren't just in Charlotte's mind. They were coming from everywhere, filling the space like an electric hum. Victor had been right. The order of the eternal eye. The power of the artifact. It was never meant to be controlled by any one person. Charlotte had destroyed the eye, but the effects of its power could never be erased. Charlotte had hoped that the world would reset, but instead, it was being recreated. The fabric of time and reality was being rewritten before her eyes, as though the events of the past were being reshaped into something new. History was no longer a linear path. The veil between the possible and the impossible was collapsing. The temple's walls faded, the stone cracked and shifting like sand in the wind. Charlotte stumbled backward, her mind struggling to comprehend what was happening. Was this the end? Or was it the beginning of something even more terrible? And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, everything stopped. The whispering, the shifting, the distortion of reality all fell silent. The temple was gone, replaced by an unfamiliar landscape. The air was fresh, crisp, and the sky was unnaturally clear. Charlotte could see a city in the distance, but it wasn't a city she recognized. The streets were different. The buildings were different. The world was different. Beatrice stood beside her, wide-eyed and silent. She didn't need to ask what had happened. They both understood. The world had been reborn. It was no longer the world they had known. Epilogue, the endless cycle. Charlotte looked around at the new reality that had taken shape before them. There was no going back. The eye had fractured time, and in doing so, had unlocked the door to a new existence. The world had been reshaped, but was it for the better? Beatrice was silent for a long time before speaking. What do we do now? Charlotte looked at her, the weight of the question pressing on her. We survive. We rebuild. We live in the world we've created and find out who controls it now. As the two women stood in the new world, the realization settled in the cycle of time was never truly over. And now, they will have to navigate a reality that was far more dangerous and unpredictable than anything they had ever faced. In the distance, Charlotte could already see the first signs of another power rising. The story, it seemed, was far from finished.